Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and on today's episode, I'm talking with Byron Morrison. He's an author and a mindset coach. He helps leaders and CEOs evolve so that they can take both their life and their business to the next level without burning out or losing their sanity, which when I read that statement on his website, I thought, yes, that is exactly what I need. So we're going to talk about his upcoming book, Maybe You Should Give Up, 7 Ways to Get Out of Your Own Way and Take Control of Your Life, and dive into a variety of topics about his heart for leadership and coaching and just kind of having some fun. So I'm super excited to talk with Byron today on the Entrusted to Lead podcast. Let's dive in. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. So welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and today on this episode, I am talking with Byron Morrison. He is an author and a mindset coach, and he helps leaders and CEOs evolve so that they can take both their life and their business to the next level without burning out or losing their sanity, which when I read that statement was like, yes, that's exactly what I need. We're going to talk about his upcoming book and a few other things. So Byron, thanks for coming on the show today. Nice to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, do you want to give us a little background about you, your story, and kind of how you came to be a mindset coach?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I went on this journey of transformation after my dad's cancer, and I lost a lot of weight. I turned my life around, and I essentially learned everything I could about nutrition, fitness, changing behaviors. And I took what I learned and it went to be the foundation of my first best-selling book. And I started a company helping people from around the world to get their health under control. And at that period of my life, truth be told, while I was a fantastic coach, I was completely in over my head when it came to running a business. I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know how to deal with setbacks. I didn't know how to manage the pressure, all of the other things that come with that roller coaster ride of ups and downs. And it essentially pushed me to a point where I just became so burnt out that my business was a mental and emotional drain. I remember just having this feeling of dread every time I looked at my calendar and what I needed to do next. I was like, you know what? I can't carry on this way. So I was determined to figure out what I needed to do to actually get under control. So I started learning everything I could about mindset, psychology, dealing with people, handling conflicts, being an effective manager, and everything else in between. And that really helped me get to a point where I could actually step up and become the leader my business needed to get to the next level. And then at the time, I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders on their health. And naturally, it started coming into it, a lot of the things that were causing them stress and depleting their energy and problems with their team. And I found that I was actually, my superpower was in helping them navigate it. I also found that was what I loved to do. So that was where my business evolved, and it shifted from the health side of it to the natural progression was into the leadership and performance, and really helping people evolve into who they need to become so that they can take their business to that next level of success.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you find that We'll talk probably about that a little bit more in the books that you've written, but I'm just thinking as you're speaking, like that mindset piece and all of that, like the emotional side of it, right? The mental side, the weight of it did you see that in your practice and as your coaching business, like that was really kind of the underlying framework or foundation that made or break a person, and not to say that, like it's so minuscule because it's so many components, but I mean, I guess really was it that you really cued in on where you started to see this mental part of this is really the most powerful thing?
Yeah, it's essentially like your mindset and the way that you process problems and deal with challenges and setbacks is the glue that holds everything else together. And this is why you can give 100 people the exact same strategy, but they're all going to get different results. So that's because of their mindset and the way that they go and execute and implement. And that's why I became so fascinated with the human psychology and how we really approach these different things. Because when I started my business, I was completely unprepared for this. I was very young and naive, and I didn't even factor in how much pressure there would be. And when everyone's looking at me to solve problems and the daily fires and setbacks, and the stress was just insurmountable. And it's only because I actively recognized and started working on it that I was like, okay, I found ways to get it under control. And that's why for me, a lot of the clients I work with, it's going back to the people who are in a situation I was a few years ago, who they know they're capable of so much more. They want to get to that next level of success, but they're barely surviving this one. So they recognize, okay, in order to actually get there, they themselves need to evolve. Because so many people get caught up in, I need more strategies, I need more tactics. And that's not actually the problem.
Yeah, more money.
The problem is the way that they're following through.
Yeah, no, I think that's so good. And we were just having a conversation about this like absolutism, right? Which I think maybe goes back to the fixed versus a growth mindset. Like we get in these places where it has to be all or nothing. And the reality is there are lots of different options, I think, on the table and ways that you can approach the problem. But sometimes we just get in like this fixed mindset, right? Where we can't see the way out of it. So I think that's really great. So you had a business and you were doing health and you went on a personal journey and then you pivoted, right? When you found your passion. So you decided to start doing this focus, which is really where your heart was. And then you take us through next steps. You started writing and now you're an author. Kind of how did that transformation happen and where is that going today?
Yeah, so the business was less of a pivot and more of an evolution because my specialty originally was on the health side of it, looking at everything from what people eat, their energy, their sleep, everything else. So it was only when I then became more involved in mindset that the business naturally grew to focusing on high performance. So it wasn't just pulling in mindset and all of these other aspects. It was also going back to what I was doing before and really tying all of that together to look at how you can get someone to perform at their best. So yeah, for me, it's a really interesting one because it wasn't like this huge pivot. It was just more of actually like, let's hone in and step it up in a different area. But through that journey, I've been fortunate at this point. I've worked with CEOs and business leaders in 15 countries now. Wow. I've written 2 books focused on CEOs and leaders to help them take control and become more effective in their role. And that's led to the next natural progression with my new book, Maybe You Should Give Up. Because in that journey, I found that the biggest stumbling block in the way of most people's success is themselves. It's that sabotaging voice that causes them to overthink, to doubt themselves, to avoid the actions they need to take. And this is why they're getting in their own way. So this book is basically taking everything that I've learned over the last decade. It's like, how do you get someone to stop sabotaging themselves? How do you get them out of their own head so that they can finally start following through with what they need to do to get to the next level?
Yeah, no, that's really great. So, I mean, I'm like, I told you before the show, like I'm ready, pre-ordered, like super excited for the book. But do you want to walk us through a couple of those? I think your book you've got 7 ways, right, in this book that you've written, 7 ways to get out of your own way and take control of your life. But do you want to talk a little bit about maybe, it might be hard to pick the most important one, but what are some of those ways that you could share with us?
So with the book, when I was breaking it down, I figured out actually there are 7 areas that every single one of us in one way or another are holding ourselves back. The first big one is reacting to the world around you. Because when you're always allowing life to happen to you and you're driven by emotion, there's no way that you can show up at your best, whether that's in business, leadership, or any other area of your life. So that's the first domino we have to knock over. The next one is fear. It's all of those doubts of what if you try and you fail? What if you get rejected? What if you're not good enough? For so many people, that's what stops them from taking action. So for me, those are the big two areas that we need to get under control fast. And then it almost becomes a snowball effect where we shift the focus to giving up on fixating in the future and worrying about problems that haven't happened yet, giving up on short-term thinking where you prioritize what you want in the moment at the expense of what you want more. And then it really starts looking at giving up on comparing yourself to other people, being so hard on yourself. And then ultimately, all of it is building to the final section, which is giving up on putting off your happiness. Because I think we all have this tendency to prioritize what's going on in the moment, especially as I know that a lot of people listening to us right now, they're leaders, they have a lot going on, they have a lot of responsibility. And so often that can come at the expense of other areas of their life. And so there's so many people I speak to who are resenting their success because they've worked so hard, but they've had to sacrifice their relationships, their health, the things that matter most. So it's looking at, okay, how do we get all of this under control so that someone can finally have a fulfilling life on their terms? Because at the end of the day, if you're not happy, then what's the point? So that's ultimately what the book is about. It's about breaking through all these mental barriers that you can finally be happy with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And my husband and I just had this conversation recently, and a colleague of mine, about self-worth. Right. And I think that's when you're talking about that, really at the end of the day, fear, I think that's a big piece. I see that in my own life. I can definitely see how that connects. Procrastination, right? Again, trying to prevent the fear or the pain from happening, right? So we procrastinate. But I think it comes down to, or I'd like your thoughts on really understanding or believing that you're worthy of this thing. And I love like the happiness piece, because I do see that a lot of people are just kind of shuffling through the day. This is what I have to do. But be it health or fitness or mental health or whatever, but your self-worth matters, right? And so do you see that connection in your book or in your research? Like when a person maybe is struggling, it's because they don't believe that they're worth the effort?
Yeah. I touch on this quite a lot in the book, and it's also a conversation I regularly have with clients. And one of the things I've really learned about it is the reason why we have self-worth issues is we put too much of who we are into external forces. So we convince ourselves that we're not enough yet because we haven't achieved this goal or we haven't hit this milestone. I was talking to a client about this recently because he's going through a stage of selling his business, and he had built it up in his mind that he'll be worthy when he's got X amount of dollars in his bank account. And then we traced it back, and it's like he convinced himself the time before when it was a previous milestone, and he just kept living in the future. And that was taking him away from recognizing that actually he's enough right now. Like at the end of the day, no accomplishment, no achievement is actually going to make him a better person. Like all of those things are amazing. Like you want to push and you want to grow. But at the end of the day, the thing where your self-worth comes from, it's knowing your values. It's knowing who you are. It's being able to go to bed at night, being like, do you know what I did mattered. It's I spent my time doing the things I wanted to, and really connecting with yourself on the things that are authentic with who you are. Because if you keep putting it in external forces, whether it's money or people or goals or achievements, nothing's ever going to feel like it's enough. So I think it's such a fascinating topic because I think we're all guilty in one way or another of putting it in that external, whereas the self-worth actually comes from within.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I have a friend, I think, not really shared, but I have a friend who's going through stage 4 cancer, terminal cancer at a really young age. And I say to her and to some, people sometimes, I said to her one night, we were sitting here in my living room and she was visiting with her husband. And I said, I don't want to have to see the world through your lenses because I don't want to wear them. I mean, I'm just honest. Like, I don't want to have to see the world through the way you now see the world. But the way she sees the world is it's very raw and it's very candid. And so when I talk about these different things that I was struggling with, like achievement, or I need to do this, or I need to do whatever, or writing a book, I'm telling her, I want to write a book one day. And she's like, how many books do you need to write before, basically what she was saying was, before you will be good enough? You know what I mean? And what happens when you've written 1 or 2 or 3 books or 10 or 20 books, right? And then what are you going to do basically when you get to the end of your day and you see that thing you were chasing was not the point. And she said, then what are you going to do? And I loved that she challenged me on that thing. And I said, I'll probably sit on my porch and cry. I'll probably be crying.
It's such a powerful perspective shift. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is one of the big things I talk about in the book as well. So it's just like, I think it's such a powerful thing to interject of, like, so many of us, we put our happiness off in the future. We say to ourselves, once we do this, then we'll be happy. But the problem with that is
Yeah.
happiness doesn't come from some accomplishment. And instead, as cheesy as it sounds, happiness comes from the journey, and the journey takes place in the
Mm.
present. And this is why, for me,
Yeah.
ultimately, the big message of the book is it's about being more intentional with what you're doing. It's slowing down. It's being present in more moments. It's feeling more of life. It's not just getting caught up in where you're going and what's going on, because otherwise life just passes by. Like, how many times do you reach New Year's Eve and you're like, I don't know where this year went? And it's just gone by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Like, the reason why it passes so quickly is we're just so in a rush to get where we're going and have so many challenges and stresses and everything else going on that we forget to actually just slow down and actually be present. And when you can feel more moments, that's when you can actually get more out of life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I think the other thing too, as I'm learning and I'm working through different things, is like feeling the hard stuff is okay. And I think obviously I haven't read your book, so you can share, but I would see like maybe you should give up. There's a tension there, right? There's a tension for all of us. And so what I think, are you saying, I guess this is the question, are you saying in your book, like, hey, we all feel like we should give up. We all like these things are hard. Fear is a hard thing. But despite that, you still have an opportunity, right, to keep moving forward. Is that kind of behind the book
Yeah.
message too?
The reason why I called the book Maybe You Should Give Up is it sounds so counterintuitive. Because if you look at all of the self-help and personal development books, all of the message is never
Yeah.
quit, keep pushing. And so often that's the very reason why people are stuck, because whether they're trying the same strategy over and over again, hoping for different results, or whether they're convincing themselves what they can and can't do. And that's why the book is all about actually giving up on everything that's holding you back from actually living the life that you want. It's not about giving up on your goals and dreams. It's about actually recognizing what are the things getting in the way and how do you overcome them? Whether that's fear, comparing yourself to other people, being stuck in the past, or just spending so much time worrying about the future. It's all of those things that are keeping you trapped, and then giving you that awareness and confidence of actually be able to let them go. So ultimately, it's a book about empowerment, about helping readers break through everything that's stopping them from living the life that they want. And that's why I love the positioning and framing of it, because people at first, they're like, I don't want to give up. Like, it sounds so counterproductive. But then actually when they see it and they're like, oh, it makes perfect sense. It's like giving up on all the things that are actually weighing you down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And then I can see there's a little bit maybe of psychology in it too, because we do all say that to ourselves most days, right? At least like, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I shouldn't do this. Oh, maybe I should just do something else. Or maybe I should just sit down and watch more Netflix because it's just a lot today. So I can see how it also allows someone to honestly kind of say to themselves, like, no, I am kind of having a hard time with this. And how do I, oh, look, maybe there's some resources in here. So if there's one of those 7 steps that you have obviously spent, years digging through and living through your own experiences, is there one of those things that really the thing that you have the greatest heart for helping leaders overcome? Is there something, one of the ones that really you just see a lot in your work?
I think the big one for me, then, it's the barrier that every single one of us battles is fear. Because especially when you're coming in a leadership position and you're wanting to step up, there's so much of that external pressure. It's like, what if you try and you fail? What if you're not good enough? What if people push back? Or it's even if when it comes to having challenging conversations, it's like, what if it turns into a conflict? And so often this is where we get stuck in our own head and we talk ourselves out of things. Like, I've been fortunate at this point where I work with anything from like up and coming leaders to CEOs running billion-dollar companies. I can tell you every single one of them in one way or another has this tendency to get in their own way. They know what they need to do, but they avoid it for whatever that external fear is. And I think it's such an interesting thing is to really take the time to become aware of why you're actually holding yourself back. One of the things you mentioned before is a perfect example is perfectionism. Like, a lot of people convince themselves that being a perfectionist is a good thing. It's like, oh, I always strive to get everything perfect. And they put it up on a pedestal. Whereas actually, if you look at it, perfectionism is just avoidance of fear. You convince yourself that it's not right yet because you're worried what's going to happen when you actually move forward. What if people tear it apart? What if it actually isn't the standard it needs to be? Like, we have all of these mental stories. So we protect ourselves by avoiding it and just saying, oh, it's not ready yet. But then in business, this is actually where things become undone, because that when you aim too long and you drag it out, that's where you lose your competitive advantage. It's when projects get stalled. It's when business opportunities get lost. So it's really understanding that actually what you want is on the other side of that fear. And often, going back to business and leadership, you need to put stuff out there to figure out what works. whether it's marketing,
Yeah.
campaigns, new projects and ideas, you have to launch it to then get feedback and figure out, okay, what's going on here? How do we improve it? But if you're just holding back because you're worried about what's going to happen, that's where you really get stuck in your own head. A perfect example of this I give in one of my books, where there was a client I was working with. He was going through this big launch, and we got on a coaching call. It was meant to come out the next day. I was like, oh, I need to stall this for a few days. There's a few things like that aren't ready yet. I was like, what's not ready? And he just broke it down. He was like, he wasn't happy with one of the font colors on the website. I was just like,
Oh no. Yeah.
he had just built up in his mind, like he was convincing himself, like, oh, we can't launch because of that. Whereas actually, it was just that perfectionism, it was that fear. He put so much into it, and he was afraid of the outcome. And we spoke about it, and he was like, do you know what? I'm being ridiculous here. And he hit launch, and it was a great success in the end. But it's just a prime example of something that now in hindsight sounds ridiculous. To him in that moment felt like such a big thing. It was like, I can't do it. It was obvious that fear was paralyzing him.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I was just talking with some people about that. We talked about ministry, but it's the same kind of thing. I think, but you could put it in, anything. But when you see a person kind of standing up there and they're doing their thing, or they're on social media, or they're running a business, we invariably look at them and kind of say, oh, well, they must know, or they have it all together, right? They're not struggling with the things that I'm struggling with, because if they were, then they'd understand why I didn't move forward. And I think that is really powerful when people have the vulnerability to share these stories, something about a font that could have really limited their company and their team to grow. But we all struggle with those fears. So I think that's very powerful.
One thing I'd love
story
to add into this, because I think with your leaders' target market, is a lot of people think that they're the only one facing these challenges. Because of the level of people I work with for some clients, like you go on their LinkedIn and their social media and you're like, that person has it all together. But then the conversations I have with them behind closed doors, like I remember one client who came to me a few months ago, when we got on the application call, I'd looked at his social media. They just won all these awards. It was all smiles. Everything was incredible. And he got on the call and he was like, I can't take it anymore. It's like, we've just doubled in size over the last 12 months. I was like, we're about to double again. It's like, I don't know if I have it in me. And it's just like so many of the leaders I speak to and work with, everyone puts them up on a pedestal. So they've convinced themselves that they have to put on this facade, and because they don't want the outside world to see that their external success doesn't match their internal state. And I think it's because when you're in that position of power and everyone's looking to you to solve their problems, it is such a huge stressor. And so many people internalize and bottle it up. And that's why I've always tried to be very open in my content to talk about the challenges I've gone through. And it's part of the reason why people resonate with my message, because they're like, it's like you're in my head, like you're talking about all these things I'm going through, and because they don't want to admit it. And that for me, it's just like we need to have a bigger conversation about it, because it's incredibly lonely, especially when you're at that level and everyone's just looking at you to lead them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's so good. I think through that, just with my experience, like with military leaders, the same thing. I do some mentoring and coaching with transitioning military members who are coming out of the military, and they don't even know what to do when they transition to a different job. But it's really, they get to that place where they're just like, they're so empty, they're just so much of the expectations that have been levied on them and the weight that they have carried for so long is so daunting. And so I was just talking to my daughter last night about how, a lot of them come out and you're like, what are you going to do now? And they want some very non-responsible job. I don't want to be responsible for people. I don't want to carry the weight of these things because it's so overwhelming. And I feel like that's really the kind of the heart of this podcast too, like you said, was just giving people, one, to know they're not alone, two, to be able to put some language maybe around the things that you're feeling and the things that are fuzzy, because we don't obviously get to do that, and then three, just that kind of encouragement and grace to know that like, hey, it's okay. It's okay that you're having a hard day, because leadership is hard. It's hard to lead and care, for the safekeeping of other people while you're still trying to like manage the budget and make the revenue goals and all the things. But your heart as a person matters, right? Like you said, at the end of the day, if you're not happy or you're not doing those things, then what is the point, really? And we all, I think, maybe not all, and I don't know, I lost my father a few years ago. And like I said, my friend, cancer, these things. So I've been on this different journey where I look at their life and what they spent and how, focused my father was in like getting all of his bills paid and being debt free and he had ran a business and he did these things, and then at the end of the days, it was kind of like he worked for 40 years, 7 days a week. And then I would listen to him all the time say, when this happens, whenever I get this, then I'll do. And that day never came for him. And so now I don't know, I live that in a more raw fashion as I try to help people. Like today is today. You have today. It should bring you joy. So anyway.
What you said there's like one of the big things in the final chapter of the book where it's just pointing out that we're all guilty of saying that once you reach that next goal, that next milestone, that next threshold, that's when you'll take some time off.
Yeah.
That's when you'll spend more time with your family, you'll prioritize your health, or you'll do something for yourself. But isn't that what you said the time before?
Yeah.
And the time before that? And the reality is every new level of success brings with it new problems, new responsibilities, and new demands. And life is always going to be busy. So if you're waiting for the perfect time to do something, it's never going to come. And this is why it's all about learning to really balance your ambitions with the things that truly matter, because it's such a difficult thing to find. And that's why you have to be so intentional with it, of just figuring out, okay, what are the things that are truly important and how do you then make them a priority? And it's one of the most challenging shifts that people have to make, but it's also one of the most fulfilling. And it's a lot of it is just giving yourself permission that's okay to step back. You don't have to have your foot on the accelerator all of the time. You can slow down and actually enjoy life, because a lot of people feel guilty for doing it. The amount of leaders I speak to are just like, I have so much going on, I can't take time off. And then they try and cram it in for weekends. But then the problem is when they're at work, they feel guilty that they're not at home. And then when they're at home, they feel guilty they're not working. So they're never truly present with anything. But as a side effect of that, their focus and performance suffers because they're never 100% there. So everything takes longer. It has diminishing returns, and they just don't perform at the level they could. And that's why I'm such a big believer. We have to get all in harmony. You need to get your work and your home life in sync and really prioritize what matters most. So that's how you then perform at your best.
Yeah. And do you find there are barriers? So I was just, as you're talking, thinking about the coach that, you and your coaching business coming alongside a leader and kind of helping them see their worth, right? Their self-worth, and that they matter and they're worth the extra effort. But do you see sometimes that like at that level, CEOs or leaders, they have a barrier to asking for help, right? Like coaching, one inside your company, I can see that because there's a vulnerability thing, right? It's hard to stand up in front of the group and say, I don't know this. But what are some of the barriers that you see people have or they have to overcome to reach out to like a coach like you and say, okay, now it's time. I really do need, some help.
Yeah. The big one is just accepting that it doesn't make them weak, because a lot of people have this facade and idea in their mind that asking for help is a sign that they can't cut it. Whereas actually, if you look at anything from the top CEOs to presidents to athletes, they surround themselves with people who bring out their best. But I've lost count of how many application calls I've had with people where they've got on the phone and they've talked to me about what's going on. And they've just said, I can't believe I've just told you all that. Like, I've never shared this with anyone. Like, you can see a weight has just been lifted off them. And it's heartbreaking because you've got these people who have committed themselves to trying to make a better life for those around them. Like, so many of the people I work with, their whole values of like, they want to change the world. They want to be someone who their team can count on. They put all of this weight on themselves and they're just crumbling underneath it. And that's why for so many people, I'm such a big advocate of you need to talk to someone, whether it's a coach or a therapist. Find someone who's disconnected. Find someone who can make a safe and judgment-free zone where you can talk about these things. Because a lot of the time, you just need that to get off your chest and to break down ideas and have a sounding board. And this is also why, like I said, do it with someone who's detached. Because you can't really talk out these things with your family. Like when you're a leader, like they don't get it. They don't understand the problems. And also they're too bought into it. It's the same with your friends. Like they want to protect you. Like they have to make assumptions. Like you need someone who's disconnected, who can like listen to you, who can understand it, but can also challenge you as well. Whereas you can't get there, whether it's from your team or the people directly around you. You need someone who has no direct skin in the game, who like you can also feel safe doing it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I say that a lot too. Like I'm a huge advocate for therapy, coaching, all those things, because we all should have one safe place where we can go and we can share what we're feeling and how these things are manifesting in us and the things we're struggling with in a judgment-free zone, and if that's like you were raised in a hard place, you have a merit, like whatever it is, but everyone needs that one safe place to go to where they can be heard and they can be seen and help them work through that. And I also say that thoughts are like clouds, they come and they go. So that's why I tell my kids all the time, thoughts are like clouds. They'll like feelings, don't make great decisions. Don't make these decisions based off of these because 5 minutes later it's going to float away, and it'll be something else. But if you're stuck inside your own head all day and that's all you hear is this soundtrack in your mind that just keeps telling you these things, then that's not going to give you the bigger perspective, see all the options on the table. So I love that. And so now you're writing this new book, you're doing your coaching. I don't know what next. That's a lot on your life and your plate. But where do you kind of see maybe your coaching business and things going for you? Do you have a future state and what that looks like for Byron and his coaching and all the things you're doing in the world?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in not getting too caught up in the future because life can change. And that's why I do have a big vision of what I want to achieve. But I've also, one of my big pitfalls in the past was just trying to rush the process and just not just allowing myself to be present and go through it. So that's why I have an idea of what I want, but I'm also open to the possibility that it could shift. But the next big step that I'm seeing in my own career is I want to launch the speaking side of my business. So I love talking and doing workshops and events. So that was something we actually wanted to launch a few years ago, and we had everything in motion. It was all about to kick off, and then the pandemic hit. So all of that just got torn upside down. So that was when I then just doubled down on the coaching and the writing. So the way I'm seeing the trajectory of my career is my coaching business with CEOs and leaders is going to stay the same. Like that's what I love to do. I'm keeping that the way it is. But then there's going to be a separate avenue where I'm going to look at start doing more events. And with the new book as well, it's more focusing on a mass market scale. Because these are issues that whether it's someone who's just starting their career, someone who's an entrepreneur, someone who's an established leader, these are things that every single one of us deal with in one way or another. So that's why I really want to get this book message out there of how can I help millions of people and have a positive impact on the world. And then from there, we may potentially also launch another group coaching program where I have a team of coaches below me who'll be delivering it while I just focus on the one-to-ones. And I've got a ton of ideas, but I'm just like, you know what? It's been such a journey to get here. I'm just focusing on getting through the launch. Let's get that out there, see how the book does. And then we'll start. I've got a course coming along with that and a few different things. And then either I'll double down on the one-to-one or I'll launch the group. But either way, I'll definitely be launching the speaking.
Yeah, though I think that's great. And I can just see the applicability across all of these different groups of people. Like we were talking before, I work in a nonprofit. And so we do a lot of counseling and, support, peer advocacy counseling and things for families who are in crisis pregnancy and adoption and abortion recovery and miscarriage grief. So we kind of work in that space. And there are these tips and things that you put in your book and these barriers, they apply to their just everyday life. You know what I mean? Just trying to get through school or trying to get a job or trying to figure out if they're going to be able to raise their family and what does that look like for them. And so there's a lot of those things that I can see that. I also have 2 high schoolers at home and 2 adult kids in the world. And so that high school space too, I can see that there's a lot of those things too, where they're kind of struggling with what's my purpose and where am I going? And how do I get, around the fear and the things. So I think the message is, like you said, it's very universal. And I think that's very important. And I think, having listened to you today and just the pieces that I've seen, that it can really have a positive impact on anyone who reads it. So I think that's really great. So I just kind of put that out there to plug, like, you don't have to be the CEO of a company to read the book and listen to the things that you're sharing, speaking and writing, because it does have a personal application, I think, for each one of us, which is really, really powerful. So that's great. Well, that's super exciting. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, like the book or anything else that you have going on that you want to? Oh, I did want to ask you about your coaching program too. So you can share yours, but then I want you to kind of walk through, like, this is how you help people. So you've got the coaching and the. So if you get a chance.
Yeah, there was one final message that I just wanted to share, just because I know from who your market is and the leaders and everyone listening to this, like one big piece of advice I could give to people I care is you just need to stop being your own worst enemy. Because for so many leaders, what part of what's got them to where they are is their tendency to be their own biggest critic. And that's great. But the problem is, and this is something I'm seeing universally across the clients I work, is that also is actually hugely detrimental. Because while it's amazing that you have big standards and expectations for yourself, you actually need to be able to balance that with what's actually going on. Because the amount of leaders I speak to who overload themselves, they take on too much. So they always beat themselves up that they're not doing more, or they just get stuck in their own head where they've got 90% of the way there and then they just feel like they're a failure and nothing's ever enough. And it's just about learning to balance your goals and ambitions with what's truly going on. And I'm not saying lower your standards and expectations and accept sloppy work, but you have to start learning to be compassionate with yourself. Because if you keep spending your life beating yourself up and being so hard on yourself, you're always going to feel like you're not enough. And whether that affects your self-worth or your happiness or ultimately also your success. Because if you get to a point where you just constantly feel like, do you know what, I'm not good enough, that's going to affect your confidence. It's going to affect how you lead and inspire others, and it'll affect the growth you can create. So I know a lot of people listening to this, it will be because they want to better themselves. But part of that becoming better is learning to accept who you are and being okay with knowing when you've done enough, when you've tried your best. And a big part of that as well is always shifting your focus from the past. There's no point wasting time on energy on things you can't change. You're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay. But your mistakes are only a bad thing if you don't learn from them and move forward. So it's about practicing that self-compassion to be like, you know what? This is what's going on. This is how I'm going to move through it. And then just allowing yourself to become better every day and being at peace with that.
Yeah. The two things I thought about, one was like normalizing that failure kind of, I don't know, just that we're not all perfect, this perfectionist mindset, like shiny, we're not all shiny. It's okay. That's a facade, most days. And normalizing, I think that in society and culture for people to have that vulnerability, I think that's a piece that's missing. Because if I knew the person standing next to me had failed, 5 times, or if they were struggling with font, or if they were having all of these late night things, then, I think there would be a degree of like, oh, okay, we don't all have to have it together, then that's okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece that is, we can maybe do a better job without it, being weird. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like this normalizing failure, and how do we do that in a healthy way? Like you're saying, like, how do we do that in a transparent, healthy way where it doesn't seem not healthy?
Yeah, I talk about this extensively in one of the chapters of the book. It's just recognizing that failure is part of the process. So many of us convince ourselves that if we fail, it's a bad thing. Whereas the reality is you have to fail to learn and improve. And this, when you actually can reframe that in your mind, you can start looking for opportunities to fail. Because you can be like, okay, I'm going to learn lessons from this. They're going to help me get better. Yet so many people derail themselves at the first hurdle. They'll be like, I failed. I'm not good enough. And they go into all this spiral of self-doubt. And if you look at the most successful people, they fail constantly. They're always failing. They're making mistakes. They're putting things out there and testing because they recognize that every failure is a stepping stone that gets you one step closer towards where you want to be. And it goes back to that worrying too much about the future and where you're going, and then being frustrated over not being there yet, and just allowing yourself to really figure out what's going on. Because your failures are only a bad thing if you keep repeating them in the future. And it's just recognizing, okay, I made a mistake here, or this didn't go according to plan, but what do we need to learn from this that helps you improve and get better? And every small improvement over time, that compounds. It's the same as if you look at some, like, I'm not really into sports, but the people I work with ask, I always used to have to like make up sports analogies. And it's just like, if you look at the greatest athletes ever, they fail constantly. They miss shots, but they've put in the work, they've practiced, and that's how they've got to where they are. Was if they got derailed the first time they didn't hit that ball or didn't make that goal, they would have stopped. But they've realized, you know what, they have to show up. They need to learn from it. They have to hone their edge. And that's how they've got to where they are today. And it's just taking that pressure off yourself that you're not going to get it right straight away. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so good. You're exactly right. I say that too. And that feedback loop, right? That's so important. And that goes back to the coaching, I think. Like you have to have a feedback loop. You can't stay in your own mind, ad nauseum and be just like, and grow or move forward or any of those things. So that feedback loop is so important, whether it's the market, whether it's a coach, whether it's therapist, whether it's, your team, whatever, but you've got to have that feedback loop in order to grow. Do you think, this was the second question I was going to ask, do you think in your study, when you talk with these leaders who are like striving, and you talk about this perfectionist mindset and I need to have all of these things, and there's a guilt or anxiety that they carry if they don't meet those things, those standards, if they're not reaching the goals that they set for them. Do you have an idea of why that is? Because I see that a lot with families that I work with too. And like, even again, high school students, there's this degree of anxiety or this degree of guilt where they're like, I'm supposed to be changing the world. And if I'm not changing the world, then something's wrong with me. Do you see that, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so much of it is just a mental story. Because people convince themselves what's going on and they don't stop to take stock of reality. It's just like, I was talking to a client the other day and he was just like, I don't feel like I'm a success. And he was going through all of these things and he was just feeling like he wasn't good enough. And we looked at it and I was like, over the last few years, he's built a $100 million business. Like he's had impact on peace. I've got staff members around the world. He's built all these incredible teams. And it was just this internal thing that he hadn't stopped to quantify. It was only when we started having the conversation and figuring, and he actually was like, do you know what? Actually, I've achieved a lot. And it's just like, this is why I'm such a big advocate of you have to take time to reflect on your journey and where you're going. Because a year ago, you wanted to be where you are today. But because you normalize what you repeatedly do, your current reality just becomes how you expect life to be. And this is why so many people get frustrated over the fact that they're not further along, because they haven't taken time to remember how far they've come. Because if you're actively working on improving something, if you've got a huge challenge in your life today and you manage to get under control, you'll just get used to not being a problem anymore. So 3 months from now, you'll forget there was even an issue to begin with. And this is why it's so important to really balance that future and past mindset with the present and what's going on. Because if you don't actually take time to take it all in, you're always going to feel like, I'm not there yet. I'm behind. Things aren't working. And it's just always about recognizing, yes, there's a long way to go, but you're never going to get to where you want to be. Whatever goals you want to achieve, whatever you want to accomplish, as soon as you get close, that goal line's going to move because there's always going to be another level to reach. And that's why you have to slow down and just enjoy the process.
Yeah, I see that too. And then it goes back to your other point in the book. I think that you said the first part was about not letting the rest of the world tell you, right? Like looking at the rest of the world and having them tell you what makes you happy or what you should be doing. I can see that a lot too in my own experiences as well. Like I'm working this job, I'm being very successful, but actually I'm not happy. And it took my oldest daughter at the time telling me, you don't like your job. And I was like, no, I do, but I do. She's like, no, you like the idea of it. But that's a very hard, reality to come to. I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also like, it's not just other people, it's ourselves. Because we convince ourselves like, oh, I need that, or I need to be doing that. And we build it up in our mind. And it's only when you stop and really process and understand what's going on that you can let it go. And this is where so many high performers and high achievers can be with their own worst enemy, because they've built up this mind of what they think life should be like. And anything short of that feels like it's not enough. And it's just really understanding of what expectations are you putting on yourself. Because the people I work with, all of the pressures that are on them, so much of it is self-imposed. It's like they've convinced themselves this is the way it has to be. This is the outcome. And anything short of that isn't good enough. Whereas actually that pressure or those deadlines or those expectations aren't coming from anywhere else. And that's why I said this before, but I'll say it again. Like, it's great to have high standards and expectations for yourself, but you have to learn to balance that with what's actually feasible and what's going on. And that doesn't mean lower your vision, but just allow yourself to slow down and actually be present and focus on what's happening in order to make it happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good. That's so good. Because we all get in that, right? I can see how so many times myself, my clients, my family, we've all been in that same thing as well. So for a person who wanted to work with you, who's decided, hey, okay, I definitely think I need some help or outside perspective, what are the different programs and coaching resources that you offer?
So my primary coaching resource is called the Evolve program. It's essentially initially a 90-day one-to-one coaching program where our focus is on helping you evolve into the leader you need to become to break through to the next level of success. And it's all about helping CEOs and business leaders change the way they think, how they navigate problems, how they deal with setbacks, the way they manage their time, perform in their role, and really help them take control so they can become more effective in what they're doing. And ultimately, the focus in it is helping them maximize their time, lead with confidence, and grow business without losing their sanity. So that's my primary one-to-one offer. I also have a couple of courses. One of them's on time management and productivity. I've got another one that's on mindset and emotions and dealing with the challenges that come with running a business. And to anyone listening to this right now, one thing I'm actually doing for anyone who pre-orders my new books is I'm giving away those courses for free. You can find out about it on my website. Like, my Unshakable course normally sells for $700. But for anyone who orders a few copies of my book, I'm giving that as a free bonus. So anyone who's listening to this, who's like, do you know what? I want to dive into all of this. Like, that's what I'm just doing as a thank you to anyone who supports me on that. It's a good way for me to give back. So on my website, byronmorrison.com, I've got all the information about all of that.
That's perfect. Yes, that's awesome. Yeah, I would been on your website and again, checked out your YouTube, and I think it's really great. I think it's really inspirational. And it's easy for me as myself, as I guess a business leader and entrepreneur, and just to see, yes, I can see how I, have struggled with those things. So it really allows you to kind of connect with you as a coach. And I love that you shared your story about your struggles, like you said, kind of why you're being transparent and you're using your business to really share, like, hey, these are the challenges that I faced. And now, this is what I've learned in my journey. So I love that you're giving that back to the world. I think it's really great. So the book comes out June 20, what's the launch date?
June 27th.
June 27th. Awesome. Super excited. Barnes & Noble, right? You can get on Barnes & Noble and then some other places too.
Barnes & Noble and anywhere else that you can order books. It's available worldwide, like on all retailers.
Perfect. Super excited. And then you'll be on your book tour this summer as you're going out and sharing your amazing message. So that's exciting for you.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's feeling a little bit surreal. I know we were talking at the start of this about writing books and putting it all together, and it's still kind of crazy for me to think that this project's been 2 years in the making. And last November, I submitted it. It all went to print. And I was like, we've got like 8 months until the launch. It's more than enough time. But now when we're just getting close to it, I'm like, I wish I had more time. It's just like there's so many different things going on, which is really exciting. And it's just like, I can't wait to get out there and start like seeing the impact it has on people. But yeah, it's just a little bit surreal. It doesn't quite feel real yet. So I'm sure it will once launch day comes around.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. Like I said, I just started writing a book with a book coach a couple of months ago or this last month. And so we're just starting this journey. And I can't imagine having it book, it's written and, it's already done and, it's in print and you can hold it in your hand and then just, moving forward with that. So it's super exciting. You're definitely on a journey that I love to watch. And so I want to keep up with you, see how things are going with you and your business and of course the book, and just would love to have you come back if you get a chance to just share the lessons that you've learned.
So anytime. Like I'm always happy to come back and dive in more. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're totally welcome. I love what you're doing. And I love that you took your story and put it together and, your heart for helping people overcome those things. Like our mindset, right? Is that thing. It's our strongest muscle and kind of the thing that keeps us from being the best version of us. So I love that you've taken that and your heart for helping people and leaders thrive and do the thing you're doing. So I am super excited and I hope your book is amazingly successful. Like I said, I think it will bring great passion and purpose to people's lives. So I think it's a powerful story. So I'm glad you wrote it. Yeah, I look forward to staying in touch with you. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for listening to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. This podcast was brought to you by our amazing producers at Wildfire Creative Company. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please hop over to iTunes or Spotify, subscribe, rate it, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And make sure you come back. We'll talk more about the essence and elements of leadership on the first and third Thursday of every month. If you enjoyed today's show, you can head over to danitacummins.com/podcast and gain access to additional free resources. But make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so you can stay up to date on the latest shows. Have an amazing day. Talk to you soon.